In May 1940, Franklin Roosevelt stood at a radio microphone and told America it was going to build 50,000 warplanes in the next 12 months. It sounded ridiculous. The entire country had produced fewer than 6,000 aircraft the year before, and most of those were small civilian models. American aircraft manufacturing at that point was a craft industry. Skilled mechanics hand-fitting parts in small shops with annual output measured in the hundreds. In Berlin, German intelligence officers studied the numbers and reassured Hitler that serious American mobilization would take at least 4 years. They were wrong. And most of the reason they were wrong was a single soybean farm outside a Michigan town called Ypsilanti, where one company was about to attempt something no one had ever done. You have to understand what a B-24 Liberator bomber was to understand why this story is impossible. The average car in 1940 had about 15,000 parts and weighed 3,000 pounds. The B-24 had 450,000 parts. It weighed 18 tons. It required 360,000 rivets in 550 different sizes. Its designer, Consolidated Aircraft in San Diego, was building them by hand, outdoors, on an open-air tarmac, 3 at a time. A typical bomber took a team of skilled workers the better part of a year to complete. The president of North American Aviation, reacting to rumors that Ford wanted to build bombers on an assembly line, said, quote, "You can't expect a blacksmith to make a watch overnight." He was talking about Ford. In January 1941, Ford's head of production, Charlie Sorensen, flew to San Diego to look at how Consolidated was making the B-24. What he saw horrified him. Planes being assembled outdoors on steel fixtures, exposed to rain and salt air. A surveyor with a transit mounted in the back of a pickup truck, eyeballing whether the propeller shafts lined up correctly. 4 hours of labor to hang a single engine. Skilled mechanics working from memory and verbal instructions rather than detailed blueprints. Consolidated had taken a full year to complete 7 aircraft. Sorensen flew home to Dearborn that same night, stayed up drinking coffee, and by morning had sketched out, on a legal pad, the blueprint for a factory that would build 1 bomber every hour, 100 times Consolidated's rate. Ford chose a site on farmland it already owned next to a creek called Willow Run, about 25 miles west of Detroit. The architect was Albert Kahn, the man who had designed almost every major Ford factory of the previous 20 years. What Kahn drew was, at the time, the single largest room anyone had ever built, 3.5 million square feet, an assembly line more than a mile long. The plant was so enormous it threatened to cross the Washtenaw County line into the next county, Wayne County, which would have doubled the annual property tax bill. So the designers added a 90-degree bend in the middle of the assembly line just to keep the entire building within one jurisdiction. The workers, who took pride in improvised engineering solutions, called it the tax turn. Nothing worked at first. Ford's methodology assumed a stable design, but the Army kept requesting changes to the B-24 based on combat reports from Europe and the Pacific, and each change required retooling large sections of the assembly line. Consolidated, which technically still owned the design, refused to share complete blueprints for months, forcing Ford engineers to reverse engineer parts from partial drawings. In all of 1942, Willow Run produced a grand total of 56 aircraft, barely 1 a week, against a target of 1 per hour. The national press started calling the plant Will It Run. Senator Harry Truman, who chaired the Senate committee investigating war production, personally visited the site twice to demand explanations from Ford executives. Critics in Washington said Ford had taken the government's money and built the biggest failure in American industrial history. Then, in the second half of 1943, everything changed. Ford restructured the operation completely. Parts would now be made at other Ford plants, scattered across Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana, with Willow Run responsible only for final assembly. The workforce, which had been turning over at alarming rates, stabilized as new worker housing came online. The Army agreed to freeze the design, and once those three constraints aligned, the production curve went nearly vertical. By April 1944, Willow Run produced 428 completed bombers in a single month. Between April 24th and 26th of that year, 100 finished B-24s flew out of Willow Run in a 72-hour stretch. By early 1945, the plant was completing a bomber every 63 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in all weather. At its peak in mid-1944, Willow Run employed 42,500 people. 12,000 of them were women, which in 1944 was revolutionary for a heavy manufacturing site. More revolutionary still, they were paid the same 85 cents an hour as men in the same job classifications, unusual by the standards of 1944 American manufacturing, making Willow Run one of the first large American industrial plants to adopt equal pay within classification. One of those women was a welder named Rose Will Monroe, who had moved to Michigan from rural Kentucky after her husband died in a car accident. She was so photogenic that a government film crew made her the star of a wartime propaganda reel. And that reel is why most Americans, when they picture Rosie the Riveter, are picturing a real person. An entire company town called Willow Village was built to house the workers, and Ypsilanti doubled in population in under 2 years. On June 28, 1945, the last B-24 rolled out of Willow Run. In 37 months of production, the plant had built 8,685 bombers, roughly half of every B-24 Liberator ever manufactured. Willow Run alone outproduced the entire bomber output of Germany and Japan combined during the same period. The final plane off the line flew directly to an aircraft storage yard in Kingman, Arizona, where it was held briefly and then scrapped for aluminum. Within 4 months of the last rollout, the workforce dropped from 42,000 to under 5,000. Ford had the contractual right of first refusal to buy the plant from the government at a discount, and Ford declined. The site was sold to an automotive startup called Kaiser Frazer for $15 million, a fraction of what the building had cost to construct. Kaiser Frazer never quite worked. The company tried to compete with Detroit's Big Three on consumer cars, couldn't match their pricing or dealer networks, and filed for bankruptcy in 1953. General Motors bought the plant in 1956 and used it to manufacture automatic transmissions and, starting in 1960, the Chevrolet Corvair, the rear-engine car Ralph Nader made famous in Unsafe at Any Speed, the 1965 book that launched the modern consumer protection movement. The Corvair itself was discontinued in 1969 after years of safety lawsuits. Employment at Willow Run drifted downward for the next 5 decades. 42,000, then 18,000, then 8,000, then 3. By the time General Motors filed for bankruptcy in 2009, the Willow Run plant was nearly empty, a shell maintained more by momentum than by economics. Most of the plant was demolished in 2014. What stands on the site today is called the American Center for Mobility. It's a test track for autonomous vehicles, built on the concrete foundations where B-24 Liberators once rolled off an assembly line every 63 minutes. The center received a $35 million loan from the state of Michigan to develop the facility, a loan it has been struggling to repay for several years as the autonomous vehicle industry has failed to materialize on the timelines its early investors promised. Of the 18,482 B-24 Liberators ever manufactured, 13 survive anywhere in the world today. 4 of those 13 came from this field. The place that outproduced the Axis powers that ended the Second World War as much as any single battlefield did is now a place where Teslas drive in circles. Subscribe for more stories of American places that mattered once and then didn't.